This is a city at the edge of the world. Perhaps its leading edge. This is a city where people tell me they work to live. And they do live fabulously well. This is Sydney, Australia. Scattered around its harbour, it's surely one of the most beautiful locations in the world. And perhaps an odd place to stick your criminals. Yet this town was frog-marched into existence as a British penal colony scarcely 200 years ago. Has this given it an identity crisis? I intend to explore a typical 24 hours in the life of a sun-kissed, wave-lapped, down-under metropolis. It's only 5 a.m. The sun picks out some landmarks, a harbour bridge, a pretty famous opera house. But Sydney is also on the ocean. It has over 70 major beaches right on its breakfast patio. And before they get into a business suit, Sydney-siders like to spend a couple of hours in a swimsuit. No wonder Sydney is regularly voted one of the top places to live in the world. Especially if you're a shark. And so, every morning, while others get ready to monitor the traffic, Mike Brown from Surfwatch goes up to assess the marine carnivore rush hour. Last year, there were 5 shark attacks in Sydney waters.
Mike, what sort of size of shark do you get in the harbour then?
Bull sharks come in each year around about this time to breed. On average, I'd say that each one's between about 2 and 3 metres long. But I tell you what, Chris, that's nothing compared to some of the sizes of great whites. I mean, so far this year, we've seen great whites that are more than 4.5 metres long. I mean, these things look like submarines in the water. You can just about land a chopper on the back of them. They're huge animals, absolutely huge.
Despite their size, a single shark is actually difficult to spot. So Mike looks for what the sharks are looking for. Huge shoals of fish, bait fish. Find one of these, and you may find something big and hungry lurking nearby.
Sydney-siders like to get up and about with the door.
Hang on, boys, we've got something to look at.
Yeah.
I saw something over here, we're just going back.
All right, big bait fish schools directly below us now.
Yes, I can see it. Yes, there, literally, like a big oval of fish.
6 miles south, we get to the famous surf beach at Bondi.
Where? There.
Great white right there.
Look at it
Great
there.
white. Okay,
Look at him. My God.
This morning, a shoal of fish is extremely close to the surf line, and heading towards them is a solitary swimmer out for his morning dip.
We got another huge bait fish school and a shark just here.
There.
Yep.
The fish are right where this guy is swimming towards.
Well, even closer, right on the shoreline there.
If he cracks on, he'll end up swimming straight through the middle of the shark's brunch.
That is an animal that can do you up in seconds.
Mike's going to let the guy know there's a shark here now.
Luckily, a large helicopter coming directly overhead alerts the swimmer. As for me, I feel safer in a cab. Taxi! There are hundreds of water taxis, thousands of pleasure craft, and more than a few kayaks here. The water may occasionally be a little unwelcoming, but you can't ignore it. Sydney is built on the world's largest natural harbour. There are over 300 kilometres of waterfront. But this is the astonishing first impression of Sydney. This is just a commuter point, a working ferry stop for a bus. But you come out into the essence of Sydney. It's like a little suburban paradise. 50,000 people will take a ferry today. to 650 separate official suburbs of Sydney. It's all strangely familiar. It's Finchley by the sea.
This is quite an eerie experience for a Pom like me, because I'm now walking along a subtropical beach and cockatoos are flying overhead. But this place isn't really a costa or a corniche. It's a version of a British promenade or seafront. Somebody has actually dropped down a toilet block from Weymouth behind me. It's that municipal quality that really makes these places like a parallel universe.
It's like Britain through the looking glass. Even everyday Sydney municipal amenities seem special to me. Like this pool. The ratepayer provides a bit of luxurious hedonism for everyone. Everyone, that is, except for the man who has to clean it.
Turn that anti-clockwise 50 times.
Firstly, the drain is opened and all the sand is scrubbed down and washed away. Ed cleans the McCullum outdoor saltwater pool every week. But this pool isn't exceptional. There are 150 public pools like this across town, all in pretty stunning locations. Meanwhile, I'm just about done. Having laboriously emptied this thing, we now have to fill it up with salt water straight from the harbour. The pool, though, is missing something vital as far as a lot of Sydney-siders are concerned: other people. Sydney is a matey type of town.
Wait for water. Go. 1.
It's 10 a.m, and this is more like it. The Icebergs Club is not just a dip, it's a social immersion. Competition is fierce, not just to win the race. In this pool, you have to prove yourself a reliable club man.
If you want to be a member here, you have to guarantee that you're going to turn up to take part in a race 3 Sundays out of 4 for 5 months during the winter season. You have to do that for 5 years in succession. Otherwise, you'll never make it as a life member of the Icebergs Club.
These swimmers, remember, are not on holiday. This is everyday life. Their pool is at the edge of the famous surf beach at Bondi. The surf may be free, the beach may be almost empty, but this swimming club provides mates. And it also seems to have a dress code, a very particular type of swimwear.
This is the very beach where I notice a lot of people wearing budgie smugglers now. They're fairly tight to Speedo. Well, the Speedo was actually invented for these beaches.
And the first person to wear them in public was arrested for indecency. It was a cliched, hardy Scotsman who came up with the idea in 1928.
To speed things up, see, Speedo? Get a bit of speed on.
As for me, I feel distinctly overdressed in my Cape Cod gingham pantaloons. The Icebergs is the only licensed winter swimming club in the world, hence the name and the ice in the opening ceremony of the winter swimming season.
Freezing cold! I haven't got the stamina to hold on to my ice for long enough to jump into the water. Keep that ice away from us!
Ice is above your head when you jump in. We don't want anyone
Just mind they don't get in your pants.
The idea is to cool down the water, ready for winter training. And, in case you wondered, it's only snowed once in Sydney since records began.
Best place for it, really. I feel like I've been in a Tom Collins cocktail.
But cocktails aren't the preferred tipple here. It's beer on the menu. After the races, everyone goes to the bar of the 80-year-old club to socialise. The pitcher of beer is not only one of the prizes in the swimming competition, it's also the heart of old Sydney. Having a drink with your mates is one of the most traditional things you can do, especially at 11 in the morning.
You don't serve beer in pints because it gets too warm too quickly. So you have a schooner. Or a jug.
Beer and rum are actually fundamental to Sydney. They were the first currency. It was hard-working, hard-drinking men that built this suburban paradise. But I wonder, are they a dying breed? The 1 o'clock gun fires every day in Sydney on this little island fort. It's a reminder that the place was once a military-run penal colony and garrison.
About 220 years ago, a man called Francis Morgan stood up here on Pinchgut Island. He was, well, he was standing on the gallows, in fact, because he was about to be hanged. And he looked out and he said, his last words, he said, "Well, you have here, indeed, a most beautiful harbour."
Yes, it was beautiful, but the first settlers had other things on their minds. In the early days, this was a very hard life. There was only one water source, and all their crops failed in this strange land. Survival was touch and go. Many of the convicts brought here may not have even been criminals at all, but they were workers. They were shipped here and forced into what was essentially indentured slave labour. Sydney gained a culture of honest, ordinary, working people. And 100 years ago, they had a tough reputation.
This was the most notorious street in Sydney, known as the Suez Canal. It was haunted by gangs called pushes in the 19th century. And apparently, down here was the haunt of a particularly ferocious gang of women who would jump on unwary sailors, pull out all their gold teeth and steal their clothes. Seems pretty quiet now. In fact, Sydney now has a reputation for having very little crime.
This area in particular, because the rocks are no longer filled with criminals, but with tourists. Nowadays, the homicide rate is 400 times less than similar cities in America. But that slightly dodgy past has worried 20th century Sydneysiders. About 50 years ago, Sydney wanted to become that overrated thing, modern. It's been a bit of a rickety journey.
Well, we're a few yards from the bridge now on the other side, and we left all that tourist stuff behind, and we come across this. All these beautiful streets, these quiet streets, still a bit inner city, but this was essentially where the Sydneysiders decided originally to establish themselves, and they built what effectively was Australia's first town. This is what they wanted for themselves, and it's just like a sort of English Georgian city. But then they became very embarrassed by it because it turned into a slum, and so in about 1960 they decided that they'd try and sell the whole thing. And they put an advertisement in the New York Times, but nobody bought it. So then 10 years later, they thought they'd knock it down and turn it into some lovely car parks. Because, you see, they were ashamed of their convict past.
Luckily, the urge to look ahead amongst some people corresponded with an urge to look back amongst others. The Rocks area was saved by union action. Sydney was becoming self-conscious and sophisticated. So, where have all the tough guys gone? By repute, the hardest men of the city are the riggers on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. This lump of man-sized Meccano was built in the 1930s. Most of the steel was shipped in from Middlesbrough and needs constant maintenance. I'm helping to remove some steps for painting about 100 metres above the water. The guys on shift today are both immigrants. Joe's from Croatia, and George is a Brit from the East End of London. When the British immigrants were shipped out here on £10 tickets in the 1950s, the reality of the place often fell below their expectations, and they were called the Whinging Ponds.
Did you find that adjusting to Australian life was difficult?
No. What would be difficult about living here?
I don't know.
It's sunny, it's warm,
Yeah,
good food,
yeah.
nice people.
And you haven't turned into a whinging pom in any way then? You haven't done your share of
Never.
whinging?
You ask anyone here if I ever go whinging.
You don't?
Do I, Joe?
No.
Be honest.
No.
Well, Joe, you tell me. Well, does he whinge?
No.
Actually, the biggest whinger we got is an Aussie.
George came here from the more confrontational parts of the East End of London. He thought he'd fit in with Sydney's legendary reputation. But it seems he was a little disappointed about one aspect.
I'll tell you one thing I did notice, Griff. Yeah. When I first got here, I thought I'd go and see a rugby league game.
Yeah.
So I've gone into the pub and there was all South Sydney supporters all drinking in there.
Yeah.
A couple of minutes later, all these St George supporters come in. I thought, oh, here we go. It's all going to go off, as it would in London.
Yes.
But nothing. They're all going, oh, hello, Dave. How are you? All right, Mike. I thought, that's not right.
Well, no, that's because that's the Sydney way of doing things, is to be matey.
You call everyone mate. I met the Premier. I called him mate. I couldn't remember his name.
I'm sure some of those POM immigrants were originally lured here by the idea of sitting under the stars by a billabong. In fact, Australia is one of the most urbanised societies in the world. Everybody down under apparently wants to live downtown. The Crocodile Dundee story is increasingly becoming just that, a story.
That's a cowhide leather.
Cowhide, OK. And then I can go right out to kangaroo, can I?
Oh, absolutely.
Leather. Keep going.
There's your kangaroo leather.
I see kangaroo leather, and I can add a few appurtenances to this if I want to make myself even more of a sort of...
The beauty with kangaroo leather is it's very malleable, so you can fold it up.
Stick it in your pocket.
It's actually a very strong leather, 3 times stronger than cowhide, and your hat's on back to front.
OK. Well, how am I supposed to know that?
Jeff thinks that it was only in the summer of 2000 that Sydney lost its bushwhacker image.
After the Olympics, the rest of the world saw Sydney for what it was, this magnificent spot, and the number of customers we had that said, they'd move here in a blink of an eyelid. Because we were an international city, we had that cafe culture, we had the food culture, we had the wine, the beers. It wasn't just a, it was quite a sophisticated thing, which they didn't expect.
But that sophistication, has that grown in the last 20 years?
Oh, most definitely. In the early 80s, so late 80s, we were thought to have been kangaroos hopping down the street, the last frontier. From that, we've now grown into, I think, Sydney Opera House is the most visited opera house in the world.
Yes. Well, I better visit it then. It may have been the Olympics that tipped world opinion, but it all started with this place.
The Sydney Opera House actually did something for city planning. It set a benchmark. It said, if you want to identify your city and give it a sort of international face, then you'd better stick up a slightly preposterous building.
People said Sydney lacked culture, and this extravagant barnstormer was the remedy. It was designed to show off, to be as much an ornament to the waterside as a facility. It was started in 1950 and took nearly 20 years to complete. During that period, it went 20 times over budget, all because of those staggeringly beautiful seashell slices of dome. The building of this place really did come out of a paranoia, the paranoia of being forgotten. It says, look at us, you won't ignore us down at the other end of the world, will you? It seemed to work. With the Opera House came a growing awareness of what Sydney could be, amongst Sydney-siders themselves. It could be more than prawns, pies and barbecues, more than surf and beer, more than a good fight. My goodness, without its beer glasses, it was beautiful. In the last few decades, Sydney-siders have certainly woken up to how valuable their harbour is. All heavy industry and docks have been moved elsewhere, although it's still so polluted that if you catch a fish here, you're advised not to eat it. Thanks mainly to the harbour, this city is now climbing the charts as the most expensive place to live in the world. It's currently 15th. 10 years ago, it wasn't even in the top 100.
These are the rich eastern suburbs. But there's tons of it. Miles and miles of winding lanes going out onto the headlands. And they go out onto the headlands. I can't get down to the waterside because the waterside is someone's back garden. I've never seen anywhere quite so neatly kept. This isn't just sort of manicured lawns. These are micro-manicured lawns. There's somebody coming out here with nail scissors and cutting these hedges. It's like walking through the set of Desperate Housewives. And those Desperate Housewives aren't swigging beer, they're sipping coffee.
A little bit in to start with.
It's lunchtime downtown. I'm not only working as an Ocker barista. I'm not only doing so in top-flight modern architecture, I'm at a fashion show in Australian Fashion Week. Though, this being Sydney, it's for a new range of swimwear. These are the high heels and hairdos of a new international Pacific Rim Sydney, one that designer Anna thinks would love to be a fashion name across the world.
Sydney is amazing because it has the beach and the city, you know, which is so great about it. But I don't know if it's, you know, it can compete on a fashion level.
Really? It's not there yet?
On a swimwear level, yeah, I think we're at the top.
Is Fashion Week here now an important week, not just for Sydney, but for world fashion yet?
You kind of appreciate the angle that Sydney fashion is coming from and Australian fashion is coming from, then it's definitely worthy.
So, and I have one last question to ask you. Can I get you any coffee of any kind?
No, I'm fine. We're feeling very
You're all right.
buzzed. Yeah.
Thank God for that, because I'm not sure I'm very good. I can do these.
You look like you're quite good behind the bar.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you're selling the story. Yeah.
Oh, good. And I'm dressed as fashionably as a barista can be.
Just a little apron or something.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay, what was your favourite?
I don't think I can say that on camera. I think we all agree on the
I don't mean the models, I mean the swimwear. You didn't even look at the swimwear, did you, the whole way through?
I kind of had to look at the swimwear to see what I wanted to see. Hey, what was your favourite, Griff?
My favourite was the fuchsia and black one.
Oh, that one!
I think probably that sense of isolation, that sense of almost paranoia that Sydney's had, has now completely disappeared, and it's a sort of world-ranking city, a really glamorous place. But I wonder whether, because it's now become so expensive to live here in a way, people are going to be working so hard to keep up with the Joneses, they aren't going to have any time to enjoy themselves anymore.
But they certainly intend to try, and to taste what the world has to offer. Sydney is rapidly absorbing culture from every other country on the globe. 1,000 new immigrants come to this city every week. I'm at a ceremony that happens most days at 3 p.m. There's a 6-month waiting list to become a citizen. Claudine was born in Singapore and moved to Sydney a year ago. She's decided to take up Australian citizenship so she can stay here permanently. Until the 1970s, Australia had a white-only immigration policy. But since then, it's welcomed people from over 250 nations.
So would those taking the oath under God please stand now? From this time forward under God,
From this time forward under God,
I pledge my loyalty to Australia and its people,
I pledge my loyalty to Australia and its people,
whose democratic beliefs I share,
whose democratic beliefs I share,
whose rights and liberties I respect,
whose rights and liberties I respect,
and whose laws I will uphold and obey.
and whose laws I will uphold and obey.
Congratulations, you're now officially Australian.
Xu Chen and Xiao Guan San. Shah Alam Duan.
What have they given you? What have they given you?
Official Australian Vegemite. And
Now, I've never had Vegemite. That's like Marmite, isn't it?
It's
Have
like
you?
Marmite, yeah.
Have you had it before?
have.
Do you like it?
yes, should I
Of
just say that?
course, why not?
Of course.
Alongside the free Framlingham cakes and the meat pies are a series of questions designed to reinforce authentic Australian culture. Like my bridge building friend, it was the premiership test that stymied me.
Okay, who's the head of the Australian government?
The current head of the Australian government?
Yes.
Or the overall head of the Australian government?
The current head.
The current head. Do they mean Rudd?
Yes.
Yes. Prime Minister.
What's his first name?
Harold. Johnny. Mikey.
It's more Australian.
Is it?
Yeah.
Gerald? No, what is it? Australian. Kevin, of course. Kevin. Yes, Kevin Rudd. I'm sorry. Yes, I should have known that. I've heard enough about him in the newspapers on the way here. Well, that was nice. It was as if all those people were being given the chance to start all over again, to wipe the slate clean and be reborn in this city. And I felt oddly envious.
All this multicultural glamour and new sophistication actually rests on a city which is profoundly Australian. And I mean in quite another way than cricket, Vegemite and budgie smugglers, as I intend to find out. It's late afternoon. I'm taking off from Sydney's oldest airport. This was where the first flying boats arrived and ushered in a modern age of easy travel. But I'm setting off to encounter something that predates history. An original lost world that lies beneath this metropolis. I'm heading north to encounter the real Australia. The edge of the city comes with a suddenness that takes your breath away.
Having gone north and followed the city up along the coast, we've come in on the Hawkesbury River and we sort of rejoin the outer northwestern suburbs after having traversed a great empty space of wilderness. Incredible.
These are the national parks, which make up 30% of the metropolitan area. They remind us what Sydney would have looked like when the ancestors of the person I'm about to meet came here, up to 70,000 years ago. That's about 60,000 years before mankind made it to Britain. 65,000 people hunted and lived in this place. Sydney was an Aboriginal heartland. But the white men brought in chickenpox, which nearly wiped out Australia's indigenous people, and now they make up less than 2% of the population. Alan is one of their cultural leaders.
Alan.
Yeah, mate, how are you?
I'm all right, how are you?
Very good.
Thanks for meeting me here.
Not a problem. Welcome to your country, Aboriginal land.
What I've come to see on the edge of these northern suburbs is a sacred site of 7,000-year-old Aboriginal art.
It's a men's site. We forbid our Aboriginal women from coming out here.
And urban Sydney is full of Aboriginal sites of significance to the Aboriginal.
Biggest Indigenous art gallery of any city in the world. Just in Metro's boundaries alone, just registered, we've got 7,000 Aboriginal sites. You're looking at emu, you're looking at whale. In the far corner, you've got the creator, Biami. Biami is the one that created all that we see here, eat.
He's the great creator of the world.
He was, with the lightning out of his head and his belt.
This is really exciting place to be, actually, Alan, for me. It has such a power, doesn't it?
I have a real sense of belonging every time I'm here.
These carvings can, in fact, be found right across the city, telling the story of when there were kangaroos here.
This fella here, you see him running through the bloody bush. You know, he would have frightened the jingies out of you. As my father told me many years ago, he said, "Oh, you know, you've got to look after the land, because God's not making no more."
In the 90s.
Meeting Alan is a reminder that this city is like a ship in a sea. It's a capsule of modernity afloat in a wild place. The continent of Australia is still 98% desert and bush, and the city is unmistakably part of this continent. just as the continent still impinges on the modern metropolis. These are the Botanic Gardens.
About this time in the evening, you can walk out from a perfectly recognisable 20th century city into a perfectly recognisable 19th century park, and there are the coconuts in the tree, except that about this time of night, the coconuts wake up.
The garden's arborealist, Peter, is worried about his national tree collection, and I've come here to help with a little experiment. Peter's idea is to try a scarecrow to discourage the bats from roosting in the more damaged trees.
Well, this is the time of night they actually wake up, is it?
Yeah, normally they'd be waking up in the afternoon.
Yeah?
And then they fly out at night, and then they come back in the morning.
You don't want them here?
No.
They're lovely.
No, they're terrible.
Why are they terrible? I think they're the sweetest things I've ever seen. They're all lying there. Look at them. In their raincoats, wraps around them.
They take off throughout the day because of the noise from the tractors and trucks and people.
Right.
They take off and land again and take off and land again. And continually over time,
yeah,
the defoliates the tree. The tree can't produce its own food.
And then the tree starts to die.
Yeah.
And you're Mr. Tree Man, are you?
I am. When there's 5, 10, 20,000 of them.
20,000?
Sometimes, yeah. Especially during mating season, and when they migrate from north to south, they'll come in influx and then go out again.
So they're hooligan bats, really.
Yeah, they're very frisky.
Are they?
Yes.
When they wake up, these things, because the way I see it, they're a fruit bat, right?
Yeah.
Presumably they wake up and the first thing they do is get themselves upright and have a
That's why I've got my hat on.
I haven't got a hat.
Well, you can hide somewhere.
All right. So what do we do? We switch it off.
If you flick that switch,
yeah,
then we'll see how successful this is.
Flying foxes are the largest species of bat, with wingspans of 1 metre. Big enough, it seems, not to be easily frightened.
They haven't really taken off.
Nope, not a flicker. It's just that old scarecrow again.
Yeah.
We hope to see the bats fly away and leave Sydney for good, but they're just lying there thinking, not that thing again.
Yeah, they've seen it before.
Yeah.
It's 6 p.m. As the bats leave the city centre to get some food, so do the people.
So what we do is we just go straight over towards here, and then when we get into the middle of the bridge, you see there's a little red diamond just in the middle of the bridge. That lets us know that we're on the right side of the harbour, and then we turn left or to port.
I'm at the helm of Radar, one of the city's oldest and finest ferries. It's the evening rush hour, and people need to get home. Most will head towards the setting sun, because that's where most people live. And it's there in the west that I'm told I'll find the real heart of this city. The city centre of Sydney might glitter like so many others, but the geographical centre, the real centre, the actual middle of this place, is 20 miles to the west. These are the great western suburbs of Sydney, 40 miles of quarter-acre plots. At night, this can be a quiet place, so people come to Returned and Services League clubs. RSLs, I've been told, are just like a British Legion, except this is a parallel universe. They may have a minute's silence every day for fallen comrades, but upstairs they also have Las Vegas. There are hundreds of these clubs across the city, and nearly everyone in Sydney belongs to one. Last year, this club alone made $1 million. It does this by tapping into a Sydney-sider addiction: gambling. Warren is the entertainment officer.
And this
is the engine room. This is the poker machine territory. This is where money is made and money is lost.
You are effectively a sort of local casino in a way that we don't have in Britain at all.
Sydney-siders gamble more per head than anyone else in the world. In fact, more money is spent on gambling than on sporting, cultural or entertainment events. But as well as the high adrenaline stuff, there's some low-gear excitement too.
Double tickets tonight, being Friday night. Double tickets, you get 70 numbers for $5.
I'm here for the evening raffle, where the big prize is a tray of meat.
And so we have seafood, yeah, fish, pork chops, rather nice roast pork.
Brekkie packs, the eggs and bacon, sausages.
And this is tomorrow's barbecue here, really, is it?
I have 28 hampers to give away, including toilet rolls and baskets of fruit. All I have to do is read out the number. All the punter has to do is check the number and pick up their groceries.
Well, good evening and welcome to the raffle. I hope that we all have our numbers ready and we don't have any undignified looking through our pockets, because I'm going to press the first number here. OK, so we're going to beware of spiked drinks. Are there people here tonight who are liable to do that? The first number is 22902. 22902. 22902. Does anybody claim that raffle prize? Anywhere in the house? 22902.
I'm allowed 4 minutes before moving on.
I'm seeing some movement at the back of the house, yes.
At 3 minutes, 52 seconds, someone claims the prize.
Here's the next number, 15500.
It's a long night in the western suburbs. Luckily, I've got another appointment in the northern suburbs, which promises to be a little more animated.
Thank you. Oh, now, I nearly made a classic mistake there. In Sydney, if you're a bloke on your own, you mustn't get in the back of a taxi, because that would be getting up yourself.
Mostly people like to sit on the front.
Yes.
If you're sitting on the back, definitely snobby, and they don't like to be snobby.
No.
They don't like to even mention to be snobby.
No. So it's getting up yourself if you go and sit in the back.
That's it.
So you're just a mate who happens to be getting a lift, and they just want to sit in the front here.
Absolutely. That's all
Yep. Being a regular Joe is a very important part of being a Sydney-sider. If you get too full of yourself, your mates will cut you down to size. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. I've crossed Sydney to the Manly Sea Eagles Stadium on the northern beaches. There are 10 rugby league clubs across Sydney. It's the big sport in this town, with an attendance of 1.5 million every week. And I'm visiting an unusual supporters club, the Eagles Angels. Once again, it seems like I've stepped through Alice's looking glass.
Hello. Hello, I'm Griff. Hello, nice to meet you. You go down well. ITV.
The Golden Girls, towering over me, have a total of 15 Olympic medals between them and over 300 world titles and records. But they value their friends above their achievements, and it's clear they love their northern suburbs.
I think what we talk about is about life, and people try to work and they work hard because they want to have the best house and they want to have, the best clothes and the best car. But I think on the northern beaches, we work, but we want to enjoy our life at the same time too. Yeah. And we will give up on things, that material things, to be able to have that.
We're very close with our mates. Every weekend we've got a gang over for a barbecue. There's sausages, there's kids galore playing in the pool. And it's very, very sad to tell you this, but even in the middle of the winter, the kids are in the pool. Yeah. So we have this lifestyle that is very much centred around the kids and our mates. Can I tell you how incredibly valuable mates are? 3 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with a terrible cancer. These guys, they got together and raised $500,000 to pay for his treatment to go to America and have clinical treatment, which saved his life. I have experienced firsthand how incredibly committed to mates we are here in Oz.
But before the match is half done, I have to move on again for another suburban experience, and this time it's an emergency. At this time of night, Sydney streets are quiet. People go to bed early so they can get up early. But some people weren't getting any sleep at all.
It could well be bandicoots at this time of the year.
In the Wyres Wildlife Rescue Headquarters, calls come in from all over town, from poor Sydney-siders having trouble with invasions from native animals.
Well, if you had have told me before I joined Wyres that there were snakes all over Sydney, I would have laughed. But there are. And people don't believe it, you know. People say, oh, but there's not snakes in the eastern suburbs.
There's snakes. You mean the eastern suburbs are too posh to have snakes?
Exactly.
I've joined Barry to help rescue these creatures from these people and to take them back to the bush. Snakes, possums and bandicoots are a common nocturnal problem all over Sydney. But tonight a call has come in from a girls' college in the centre of town. It's now the middle of the night, but Catherine and Eugenie are too scared to go to bed.
Please do not enter. Owl inside.
I was on my bed and I heard like all this flapping and squawking outside, and there's like these massive crows chasing this owl, and I'm like, crazy birds, what are they doing? Whoa. And it flies straight past my face.
So it's the crows that are to blame?
Yeah, crows chasing it.
And now it's my job to chase it out.
I need to ask you, Barry, is the idea that you're going to try and capture it by hand and put it in here, or are you going to try and put this over the top?
I'm going to try and net it. I don't think you'll be able to catch it by hand.
All right, so do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
That's up to you. I think
Okay. I'm going to have a go then.
All right, just as long as we don't hurt it, that's all.
All right. Oh, there he is. I have to say that he looks particularly suspicious of us having come in here. There's absolutely no doubt he thinks not the man with the net. Not the man with the net. They've sent the man with the net to get me. Okay. Is it all right if I stand on your bed? Okay.
Under the circumstances, yeah.
Okay. Oh!
That's all right. That's all right.
Very slow. But he's not going to fly into it, is he?
No.
My owl netting skills clearly need some work. So to stop the bird getting too distressed, I leave it to the expert.
I've got him in there now.
Okay, we got him.
Ladies and gentlemen.
How's the owl?
He has got some sort of an eye injury. I don't know that it's serious, but we'll get it assessed in the morning.
Right.
I'm going to take it first to our raptor coordinator,
Yeah.
and our wise people will be able to pretty well assess it and decide whether it does need veterinary care or whether they'll be able to treat it themselves, depending on what the injury is.
The first settlers must have found this an unsettling place. A strange landscape at the other end of the world, filled with weird creatures. In 200 years, this city has grown up quickly. I take a last look over it from Macquarie's lighthouse. Built in 1818, it was the first in Australia.
I can see the dawn coming up now on Brighton down there. Putney over there and Mortlake. On Epping, which is over there. And right over there on Liverpool. All those incredible familiar names. But of course, if I turn this way, then the nearest land is 7,000 miles in that direction, and about 1,500 miles in that direction if I wanted to go to New Zealand, which is, I suppose, as far away as anywhere from anywhere else. Sydney was incredibly isolated for 200 years. And perhaps that's the reason that the people who were living here wanted to make themselves at home. They wanted these things to be cosy and homely. And perhaps it's only in the last 20 years that they could allow themselves to be a little bit more exotic.